Hey, Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2024. Maybe this will be the year that the Lord comes to get us. What do you think? Well, I just wanted to talk to you briefly about a couple of things that you really need to consider and ponder. And one of these things included something that the Lord had revealed to me about Passover. Now, I just did a video about the red heifer ceremony and also found some more articles stating from the gentleman who brought the red heifers from Texas. He said that their intent is to sacrifice one of the heifers at Passover this coming spring, which would be sometime from April at sundown the 22nd through sundown April 29th, sometime in there. And what is interesting about that is I told you that one of the revelations I had was that this was the covenant with many, and it's many Jews worldwide, because they want to strengthen their ancient covenant with God with the sacrifice of a red heifer. But we know in the New Testament it tells us that, the blood of bulls and goats and of a red heifer can never take away our sins, nor the sins of the Jewish people. That's why the Messiah came. Okay, so let's ponder something for a minute. What are the odds of the timing of if the red heifer ceremony takes place at Passover? What are the odds that just before that we have the solar eclipse, and it's the one that when you cross it over, it basically puts an X on the United States, You've seen that in lots of people's videos. I did a video about it, looking at it not as though the United States is being crossed out, but I looked at it from the aspect that that is the ancient Paleo Hebrew letter Tav, T-A-V, and it literally is a sign. It means a sign, a mark, a signature, and covenant. So if the red heifer ceremony is performed just after that sign of the covenant, and the red heifer ceremony starts the covenant with many of the Jews worldwide to supposedly mark them with the ashes of the red heifer to purify them from their sins, which can never take away their sins, then it's interesting that the Hebrew letter Tav would be in the sky as a sign that this covenant with many was about to happen. Ponder that for a minute. And then ponder the fact that I told you last Passover that the Lord had shown me something else about that. You know how the Lord kept telling us, watch therefore, I tell you, to keep watch so that you won't be taken off guard, or that this time will come upon you as a thief in the night. Well, I told you in that video, it was all about, could this specific night be the night that Jesus was talking about? Because think about this. It was the night of Passover Seder when the Jews that were with Jesus, his disciples, they went and they had the Passover Seder. And then they sang the Hallel, and then they went to the Mount of Olives. Well, the very night that happened, the Jews actually call that night the night of watching for the redemption. So there is a specific night of watching, specifically known as the night of watching. And I truly believe this is what Jesus was talking about, not just watching at any old time, because this had significance with being the night that the Hebrews were delivered and saved out of Egypt, and they crossed over out of Egypt into the wilderness. So God was taking them towards the promised land on that night. And since it was that night that the Jews were delivered, the Hebrews were delivered from the hands of the oppressors in Egypt, it is the night of watching for their redemption. And so it was called the night of watching by the Jewish people. So here we had Jesus eating the Passover Seder and going out to the Garden of Gethsemane with the disciples on the night of watching for God's redemption. And there they were in the garden, and that's when Jesus' arrest took place. And this was the time when Jesus kept going to the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane and telling them, couldn't you just watch 1 hour? Watch therefore. Go ahead and take your rest, he said on the third time. They were supposed to stay up and keep awake and be alert to watch for the redemption. So I had pondered whether this was the specific night that Jesus is meaning when he says for us to be watching for him to come in the clouds. And this would be Passover night after the Jews eat the Passover Seder. Then they open the door to symbolically let Elijah in. And wouldn't it be something if that is the moment that the Lord takes us to be with him, because he is representative of the third cup of wine in the Passover Seder, which is the cup of redemption. And that was the night of watching for the redemption. Could it be that he takes us on the Passover, on the night of watching, to go on the overpass to pass over into the eternal promised land? Now, this was something that's copyright material in my book, so I just want to make that clear, that something that the Lord revealed, and I told this whole story in my book. But I realized that, an overpass is like a bridge, a freeway that's up in the air. And usually what an overpass is people up above. And then there's some people that are up above on the overpass. Then there's people that are left below on the ground that are not going up on the overpass. They're staying on the same level where they are. Well, I realized that this was symbolic, definitely, of the rapture. We are going on like an overpass, and those left behind that are the ungodly, the wicked, they will be left on the same level where they were before, while we are taken on the overpass to pass over into the eternal promised land. So it's all very interesting how God interweaves these pieces of the story. And I am pondering this and thinking, okay, this April, we've got this eclipse that puts the other line across the United States that makes the Hebrew letter Tav, which means covenant, sign, mark, and signature. Could it be telling us that they are getting ready to strengthen their covenant with God, with a covenant with many Jews worldwide to try to take away their sins? And because they've rejected their king, we know that they are not accepting his blood. They're considering his blood as a common thing and trampling it underfoot. Well, what are the odds of those things coinciding? The eclipse meaning covenant, mark, signature, and, then the fact that the night of watching happens on Passover night when the Hebrews left Egypt because God was taking them towards the promised land. We will be leaving the world, which is considered a parallel to Egypt, and crossing over with the Lord to be where he is, into the promised land for eternity. And those who are in their graves would come out of their graves at that time. Now, I just wanted to put all these things together because all of these are coinciding in April, with the eclipse happening first on April 8th, and then the red heifer possibly being sacrificed this April. And more than likely it would be that first night, so that they could start the sacrificial system, and they would think that they would be purifying the Jews worldwide with that ashes of the red heifer. They said that they could sprinkle 660 billion Jews to purify them. That's many people. So Daniel was talking about the ancient monarchy of Judah. He was talking about the restored Jerusalem, the restored temple, and God's divine presence returning, and talking about the Jewish people. That's what he was praying for. So the covenant with many is a strengthening of the ancient covenant that the Jews had with God from ancient times. And they made a covenant with him at Sinai. So all of these things are happening at once. The Tav, that's the sign of the covenant, and then the covenant with many of the start of the red heifer ceremony, which starts the sacrificial system, and the night of watching happens that same night, a Passover night, when they are to watch for their redemption and for the Lord to come specifically. So they were to watch for the Lord to come on that specific night of watching, is what I'm telling you. And this is something that's never been really known before, but I'm just presenting it because what if at the time that they perform the red heifer ceremony and we're watching for our king on Passover night, and a lot of us partake of the Passover Seder, and the third cup being the cup of redemption, on the night of watching for the redemption and watching for the Lord to appear and come to save us, that happens on that night. So it's all extremely significant. And wouldn't it be something if at that moment we are taken out and they are left on the lower level while we go up on the upper level to be with the king, and then they have the 7-year time of Jacob's trouble, because like Nebuchadnezzar was king and he became a beast until he acknowledged after 7 years that there is the one true God, of the creator of the universe, until he acknowledged him, and he was restored. So these Antichrist spirit Sanhedrin group, they want to be the world's supreme court and have one king, and they want that king to rule the world, and they want to bring all the nation's representatives to the Sanhedrin building so that, the Jewish people there, the Sanhedrin, could be the judges and all. I just think it's profound to think we have the sign of the covenant in the sky. We have the night of watching at the time that this covenant with many would take place. It all is not just a coincidence. And anyway, the Lord just wanted me to put all of this together in this brief video. And I hope that you have enjoyed my videos over the past few years. I believe I started my channel June 11th of 2015. So I've been on here for quite a while. And I really need people's support. And, you know, other channels and stuff, they claim to be really pious and all of this stuff, but yet they're saying that God supplies their needs, so that means they are getting donations. Anyway, people need to be just telling it like it is, I guess. I don't know. But the thought of the rapture happening at the same time that the other event happens, the covenant with many Jews, that's supposed to purify the Jews worldwide so that they can rebuild their temple and perform their sacrifices again. All of that's going to happen all at the same time, apparently. So in Daniel, you know, the reason why I finally saw that it was a blood covenant and that it is the red heifer sacrifice is because the Jews worldwide would be agreeing to uphold the laws of God and strengthen that covenant that they had with God from the beginning. So it's a covenant that's existed for thousands of years. And because they haven't had a sacrifice for their sins, because they've rejected Jesus, then they think that they have to perform this ceremony, and they think they'll be purified from their sins. But they can't be. And the law only makes you realize that you are a sinner, so you can't be saved by keeping the whole law. Only the righteous king that's perfect can keep the whole law. And we are cleansed in his righteousness, through his blood. So the blood of the red heifer will never take away their sins, and so they will die in their sins if they believe that it's going to take away their sins. So it is a covenant of death for that reason. I tried to explain this in the last video, but, you know, some people don't see the last video, so I kind of want to cover that ground again. But we have the night of watching during Passover this spring. At the same time, we have possibly the red heifer ceremony. And just before that is the sign in the sky of the Tav, the covenant. So maybe it's signaling us that this is the covenant with many. And the reason why I realized that is because halfway through the 7-year time of Jacob's trouble, the Antichrist puts a stop to the sacrificial system. So it is the red heifer that starts the sacrificial system. So that has to be the blood covenant with many. And the night of watching being the night that Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they were to be watching for their redemption, and Jesus kept telling the disciples to wake up. Couldn't you just stay awake, you know, for 1 hour? And he was telling them to watch on the night of watching. So I don't believe that watching is just, you know, any random old day. I believe that there was a specific night that the Jews call the night of watching. They literally call it the night. So that is a specific time. So I wanted to bring all this together and make you aware of it, because it could happen simultaneously. You know, what if that happened? It ended the church age, and then, you know, we go up and the tribulation begins. So this is something to keep in mind. And more biblical facts and scriptures to show you that this literally could be it. You know, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there from the scriptures that all of this is coinciding with it. And especially that part of Jesus telling the disciples to watch in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then they fell asleep. And why? Because they were going to die, and he was going to have to come back after 2,000 years' time and be crucified and resurrected before that. So, you know, we know that they just recently found a moat in Jerusalem. And in the book of Daniel, we know that there was a moat built at the time that the Messiah was cut off. So, you know, or just before that time. But it's truly interesting to see all of this come together. There was one more thing I wanted to add here. The night of watching is known as Lael Shimarim, and it is said in Exodus 12, verse 42, that the night of the Exodus, when God brought the people of Israel out of, or the Hebrews out of Egypt, it says that God kept a watch, to watch over them, to bring them out, or he kept a vigil. So because God kept watch on that night so that they would be protected, then the Hebrews kept watch that particular night from then on in their history as a reminder that God was watching on that night to watch over them, to free them from their bondage. Well, what are we? We are in the bondage of something that's like Egypt, this oppressive world with its wickedness. And this could be the very night of watching that is memorialized for the night that God watched and delivered them. So this could be when the rapture could happen on the night of watching, is what I'm telling you. And not only that, but what I wanted to point out was when Jesus was telling the disciples on that night, couldn't you just watch 1 hour? And he kept going back to them 3 times. And then the last time when he said sleep on. We know that when the Bible talks about sleep, it's often talking about death. So when he was telling them to sleep on now, he's mentioning on the night of watching, he's speaking of the dead in a roundabout way by saying, sleep on now. So this could also be the time of the resurrection of the dead, just before the living believers are raptured up in the harpazo and taken to be with the Lord in the air. Now remember that we're going into the glory cloud of the Lord, and this is what the Hebrews were in the wilderness. God was inside the cloud, and they were covered with the cloud that protected them, and often the cloud would lift up in the morning, real early in the morning, and then they would set out to march. So this is what I think is going to happen, that the timing of it would be, you know, the time to cross over. And God speaking about the dead by telling them sleep on. In other words, they were going to die, but they were going to see him again, and he was going to resurrect them. And so the night of watching included the dead in his statements. The bottom line is this. Passover night was the night of the Hebrews' redemption. And so because of that, they believe that at some future date, that will be the night that they are redeemed. So it's really the night that they expect the Lord to appear to save them. Do you know what that means for the rapture? We're watching and waiting for him to appear to take us to be where he is. And in his Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, he would have told us. He goes to prepare a place for us, that where he is, there we may also be. And so with that, ponder these things and keep them all in your heart. So I think this about sums it up. I just thought of telling you that it, you know, the harpazo has to do with the dead rising first, and then those who are alive and remain being caught up together with them in the glory cloud of the Lord. So they wandered through the wilderness, and the cloud overshadowed them, and their clothes did not wear out, neither did their shoes. And he's taking them on that night to watch over them, to free them from the bondage of this world. So it's very probable that it could happen then. And so we just need to be aware of these things and be watching on that specific night of watching, which is Passover night, right after the Passover Seder. And this is when they left Egypt, and this could be when we could be leaving. Will it signal the end of the age of grace and God dealing with his people for the last 7 years until they acknowledge him as king? I think so. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Thank you for watching, and thank you for watching my channel, Elijah and Moses, the two witnesses. I wrote about them in my book. That's why I named my channel after them. So I hope you appreciate it, and think about this for your Happy New Year, your Happy New Year's Day, I should say. And now we're getting to sundown, so I guess the holidays are officially going to be over pretty soon, and I'm not ready for that. If you want to, it's paypal.me/KKROCOCO, and my mailing address for donations is Kimberly Ballard, Ballard, P.O. Box 246, Niwot is Niwot, Colorado is CO 80544. And also, if you want to read miraculous things such as these revelations, there's a huge volume that I wrote called The Almond Tree, Aaron's Rod, the Messiah King of Israel. It's available at Olive Press Publisher. That's the best place to get it. It's available other places, but it's the best place to purchase it, and you would just be astonished by it. I'm hoping that the Lord's going to open some doors for some other adventures to reveal more about himself in the near future. And so I ask you to please, if you were unsubscribed, please resubscribe. I've been having problems with YouTube. Happy New Year, happy 2024. And April is not that far away. And it's going to be the end of April that these things come about. And they are pretty much saying in different places that the sacrifice of the red heifer will take place. And I do believe it would be Passover instead of Shavuot. So, you know, Passover's the time when they do the sacrificial stuff. All right, well, I hope you're having a blessed holiday. Hope you had a Merry Christmas and a good New Year's Eve and a blessed New Year's Day. I'll talk to you guys later. Shalom for now. Bye.